Story 1, The Second Key. I arrived just before dusk. The beach was empty, as expected. Late October in Cape May wasn't meant for swimmers or sunbathers. Just wet sand, gray skies, and wind that made the old boards groan under your feet. The house stood alone, where the dunes thinned out and the land gave up trying to be anything other than wet and flat. It looked taller than I remembered, too narrow, like someone had pulled it upwards instead of building it out. The shutters flapped loose on one side. Paint had peeled in long strips, curled at the edges like dried paper skin. I parked by the gate, killed the engine, and just sat there for a while, watching the fog pushing across the sand. I hadn't wanted to come, but after Uncle Raymond passed, there was nobody else to handle the estate. My mother would have done it, if she were still here, if she hadn't died 3 months ago, if she hadn't called his name in the hospital while unconscious. I'm not a superstitious man. I edit other people's words for a living. My job is to trim the nonsense. I don't chase meaning where there isn't any. But the way she said his name that night, breathless, almost frantic, I remembered that. The front door stuck when I tried it, so I had to shove my shoulder against the frame to get it to open. Damp swelled the wood, and the inside smelled like salt and paper rot. The air was heavy with that scent of things left too long untouched. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. I sighed, turned on the flashlight on my phone, and stepped in. The living room was just how I remembered it from one summer visit 20 years ago. Overstuffed chairs, a lamp with a yellow fringe, stacks of books that seemed to breed in corners. Same grandfather clock, not ticking. Same rug that curled at the edges. The wallpaper was faded but intact, floral and pale blue. Watermarks traced along the ceiling like veins. The silence was thick. I walked carefully out of habit, like noise might wake something up. Upstairs, the hallway branched into 4 doors. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a 4th door I didn't recognize. That caught me. I stared at it a moment longer than I meant to. It didn't fit. Darker wood, wrong knob, recessed deeper than the others. It looked older than the rest of the house somehow, though that made no sense. Shrugging it off, I went back downstairs. There was time to sort things out tomorrow. That night, I just wanted to make a dent in the boxes and maybe find something about the property value. The real estate agent I'd spoken to said the house needed some TLC, which was agent speak for falling apart but still standing. In the study, if you could call it that, I found the desk, Raymond's old roll top. Inside, mostly junk. Receipts, postcards, dried pens. Then, in the drawer, 2 identical silver keys on a tarnished ring. Both were marked Maine. One obviously fit the front door. I'd used it. But why 2? Maybe a backup. But then why keep them both in the same drawer? I pocketed the second one and didn't think much more of it. The wind picked up around 11. The windows rattled in their frames. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I found in the hall closet. No cell service. The power blinked on for a second, then off again. I didn't bother lighting a candle. I fell asleep sometime around midnight. At 3:03 a.m. I woke up. No dreams. Just a sound. A single, soft knock. Not at the front door. Upstairs. I sat up too fast. My heart was pounding before I even had a thought in my head. It wasn't a crash. It wasn't a bang. Just a knock, deliberate, measured, like someone asking if it was okay to come in. I held still, listening. Silence. Just the wind outside. Maybe I imagined it. The grandfather clock wasn't working, but my phone still showed the time. 3:03, on the dot. I got up, climbed the stairs. The boards creaked under my weight. Nothing in either bedroom. The hallway was dark. I aimed my light at that 4th door, the one I didn't remember. I walked toward it. There was nothing unusual about the door, except, now that I was looking closely, the doorknob had scratches beneath it. Tiny ones, like it had been turned from the inside over and over, long nails or something sharper dragging just below. I tried the knob. Locked. I looked down at the key still in my palm. The second main key. I didn't try it. Not that night. Back downstairs, I convinced myself it had been the wind. Old houses make noise, but that didn't explain the scratch marks. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with my back to the wall, Flashlight on, staring up at the ceiling where the water stains seemed just a little darker than they'd been when I first arrived. I spent most of the next day pretending I wasn't afraid of the upstairs door. The sun had come out in thin patches, casting the house in a gray, almost indifferent light. I made coffee on the old propane stove. It hissed more than it should have, but it worked. I drank it black, sitting at the kitchen table, staring out through streaked windows at a horizon I couldn't quite see. The ocean was out there, but the fog hadn't lifted, just a wall of damp air and motionless dunes. I kept telling myself I'd go upstairs, that I'd check the room, that there had to be a logical explanation, a sealed storage space, maybe an attic access that got boxed in during a renovation. But every time I reached for the stairs, my hand drifted somewhere else. A drawer to sort, a photo to glance through, a book I hadn't noticed a day before. By early afternoon, I convinced myself the knock was stress, grief. Houses like this collect memories, and if you're not careful, they start whispering them back. Still, I kept the second key in my pocket all day. Cold metal, flat teeth, identical to the front doors, except for one faint scratch across the stem. I hadn't seen that before. It looked recent, accidental, maybe, or not. I didn't open the upstairs door. I told myself it wasn't important. By late evening, the wind had died. The house felt heavier without it, like it was listening. I sat in the living room with a stack of my uncle's papers, mostly old bills, clippings from newspapers that no longer existed. Among them, I found something odd. A small slip of paper folded neatly into quarters, yellowed and nearly brittle. There was no date, no signature. Just one sentence typed in the center. Do not let it in twice. That was it. No explanation. No context. I unfolded and refolded several times. Thought about throwing it out. Didn't. When the lights flickered again around 9, I finally lit a candle. The shadows jumped on the walls like they wanted to say something but weren't sure how. I stayed downstairs until midnight, telling myself stories about drafts and house settling. My mother would have called it old bones creaking in their sleep. She used to say that about our floorboards back home, but this didn't feel like sleep. At 2:55, I was still wide awake. No wind, no rain, just the hum of silence stretching so thin it might snap. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot on cold wood, key in hand. It was quiet. I climbed halfway up and stopped. My hand rested on the rail, the other gripping the key hard enough to leave marks. At 3:03, I heard it again. One knock, not loud, not aggressive, polite, the kind of knock you use when you're sure you belong. It came from behind the upstairs door, the one that didn't belong. I didn't speak, didn't move. The candle in my hand flickered. The wax had begun to pool, tilting toward my wrist. I backed down the stairs. That night, I didn't sleep either. Just lay on the couch with the blanket up to my chin, listening to a silence that had taken on shape. In the morning, I tried to leave. Not because I was afraid, not exactly, but because I had started to notice something about the house I couldn't explain. The clock in the hallway, the one that never worked. It had started ticking. Only it wasn't keeping time. It ticked at random. 1, pause. 2, pause. 4 in a row, then silence. Then 3. I watched it for 20 minutes. No pattern, just noise. Outside, the fog hadn't moved. It clung to the shore like it was protecting something, or hiding it. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and locked the front door behind me. My car sat where I'd left it, dew settled thick on the windows. The key wouldn't fit. Not the car key. That worked fine. The front door key. The one I'd used to get in. Now it didn't turn. Didn't even slide in properly. I stood there in the cold, staring at 2 keys that looked identical but felt wrong in my hand. I tried the second one. It fit. Perfectly. I don't know why that scared me more than the knocking. Back inside, the air felt heavier than it had yesterday. The candle I'd left on the table was now on the floor, still standing upright, unburnt, like someone had moved it and put it down with care. The note was gone. I checked the trash, the desk, the box I found it in. Nothing. The drawer where I'd first seen the keys had splinters along the edge, as if something had been pried loose. That night, I made a decision. I brought a hammer from the tool shed out back, found a flashlight that didn't need shaking, and at exactly 3 a.m., I stood in front of the upstairs door. The handle was warm. I placed my ear against the wood. No sound, no breath, just the faintest sensation that someone stood on the other side, doing the same thing. I didn't knock. I walked back to the couch and waited. At 3:03, there was no knock. This time, the doorknob turned. Just a click, then nothing. It didn't open that night. Just the sound of the knob turning. Once, then stillness. I told myself I might have imagined it, that I was tired, that the air in the house had gotten to me. But the next morning, when I climbed the stairs again in daylight, the door was cracked open just half an inch. I hadn't done that. There were no footprints. Nothing visibly disturbed. Just that door, quietly ajar as if inviting. I didn't go inside. I stood there for a while, staring at the sliver of darkness beyond the frame. Not pitch black, just dim, like light didn't belong in there. It felt colder on the landing. The kind of cold that sits deep in the walls, not from weather, but from something forgotten. I closed the door, didn't lock it. I wanted to see if it would open again on its own. That day I stayed mostly downstairs. Read old letters I found in a box marked private. Most were blank. One had a date, but no message. June 12, 1974. Nothing else. The envelope was sealed shut with something thicker than glue. Brittle, yellowed. I didn't open it. I made lunch around noon, but wasn't hungry. The clock in the hall had stopped again. I hadn't touched it. When I checked my phone, I realized the date hadn't changed. It still read the same as yesterday. I rebooted it. Still the same. Maybe a glitch. That night, the fog rolled in earlier. Dense, suffocating. The dunes vanished. Even the front gate disappeared into the gray. There was no wind, no sound of surf, only the low hum of stillness outside. I didn't light a candle. I didn't want to cast shadows tonight. By now, I'd stopped checking the time. I knew when it was coming. When I heard the knock, it wasn't from the door this time. It came from a wall behind the couch. A single, hollow knock. Measured. Familiar. I sat up and waited. A second knock. Same rhythm. Then silence again. The upstairs door stayed closed that night. But in the morning, the candle I hadn't lit was back on the table. Lit. Half burnt. I didn't touch it. I walked to the beach for the first time that week. Thought the fresh air might help. But the ocean didn't feel right. It was there, moving, but not in motion, like someone had painted it. A flat canvas of dull color and sound that didn't carry. The sand was wet, but my shoes left no prints. When I looked back at the house, I noticed something strange in the upstairs window, the one above the sealed room. It looked open, though I was sure it hadn't been. More than that, I could see a curtain moving. I hadn't seen a curtain in that room before. I went back inside, climbed the stairs again. The door was wide open, not ajar, open. The air was still. I stepped into the room. It was smaller than I expected. Bare walls. No window, at least no real one. Just painted glass. A frame sealed the wall. Light behind it, but not from outside. The wallpaper had peeled in strips, curling up from the corners like something underneath had tried to push out. There was no furniture, just a ring of darker floorboards in the center, almost like something round had once sat there for years and stained it. A trunk, maybe, or a table. The strange part was the smell. Salt, damp wood, and something faint, something like rust. I didn't stay long. I walked around the perimeter, never stepping inside the circle. I didn't have a reason for that. It just didn't feel right. Before I left, I noticed a small detail near the door. Along the baseboard, in a narrow strip where the wallpaper had torn away, there were markings, scratches, etched in with something sharp. Not words, just tallies. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some grouped, some scattered. I didn't count them. That night, I placed a key on the table by the front door. I didn't want to carry it anymore. I lay awake on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Listening, the house made no sound. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, but I woke up at dawn. Early light filtered in weakly through the fog. The key was gone, not from the table, from the house. I searched every drawer, every coat pocket. Nothing. The door upstairs was closed again. I checked the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried to force it. Nothing gave. Later that day, I called the real estate agent. Told her I wanted to sell it as is. No walkthrough. No inspection. Just get rid of it. She asked if I'd gone into the old room. Her voice changed when she said it. Quieter, like she expected me to understand what that meant. I said I didn't know what she meant. She was silent for a few seconds. Then, well, if you haven't, don't. It's not part of the listing anyway. I didn't ask why. I stayed one more night, but I slept in my car. The fog never lifted. I left early, before the sun broke through. The house looked smaller in the rearview mirror, shrinking behind a veil of mist, almost like it had never been there. But I remember the key. I remember the knob turning. I remember what it felt like to know with complete certainty that something was already inside, and it had been waiting. Final line. The knocking hasn't come back, but I still hear it some nights in houses that aren't mine. Story 2. The Weight Beneath the Sand. I arrived just after 6 in the evening. The drive from Raleigh took longer than expected. Construction. Then a detour through a town that didn't show up on GPS. But I wasn't in a rush. There was no one waiting, no check-in time. Just a key under the planter and a house at the edge of the sea. The beach house was pale gray with faded white trim. Narrow, tall, like someone stretched it upward instead of building it wide. One small porch, one rusted wind chime, one mailbox shaped like a fish. It stood alone between 2 empty lots overtaken by sand and sea oats, the kind that leaned toward you like they were trying to whisper something. Inside, it smelled like old wood, sun-heated plastic, and just faintly like pennies. I took my shoes off at the door. The floorboards were warm and slightly uneven. They bowed under my weight in places, like soft cartilage instead of bone. I chalked up to age. My friend Naomi said the place hadn't been renovated in over 20 years. A little haunted in a charming way, she joked. Perfect for hiding out. That's what I wanted. Quiet. After the divorce, I didn't want people or questions or empty assurances. I wanted time, stillness, and a door I could lock behind me. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, made tea, and read for an hour before bed. The power flickered once, but came back quickly. No storms in the forecast. Just heat. The air didn't move. Even with the windows cracked, the house felt sealed, like it was holding its breath. At 2:13 a.m., I woke up without knowing why. Not from a dream. Just suddenly awake. The sheets were cool. My hands were clenched, but I don't remember feeling tense. I sat up and turned on the lamp. There was sand in the bed. Not much. A few grains against my arm. Enough to feel. I brushed it off and checked my feet. Clean. The floor, too. I hadn't been outside since dinner. I told myself maybe I'd track some in without noticing. Sand gets everywhere. That's what people always say. Still, I got up and changed the sheets. The next morning, I took my coffee out to the back deck. The ocean was quiet. Not flat, exactly, but hesitant, like it was waiting. The gulls didn't call. No breeze. Just the sun climbing up behind the dunes. I stepped off the deck to walk the beach path. The sand felt strange underfoot, not just hot, but oddly soft. It shifted more than it should. I sank half an inch deeper than I expected. A strange thing to notice. But I did. Halfway down the path, I stopped and turned around. I'd left footprints behind me. Of course I had. But the odd part was the sand was still shifting in a spot where I'd already stepped. Moving just slightly. Like something had settled after I'd passed. I shook it off. Too little sleep? Too much coffee. I walked back to the house. Tried to convince myself I didn't care whether the place had weird floors or breathing sand. I was here to get away. That was the point. I spent most of the afternoon inside. I read, sketched a little. I hadn't done that in weeks. My lines were stiff, but it felt good to hold a pencil again. Around 5, I went to the upstairs bathroom to wash my hands. That's when I noticed the mirror. It was tilted slightly downward. Only a few degrees, nothing obvious. But I could see less of my face than I had that morning. I assumed the screws were loose. I reached up to adjust it. It didn't budge. Not stuck, fixed. I frowned, leaned closer. My reflection looked a bit off. Not distorted. Just too still. When I moved, the image followed a beat late. Barely perceptible, but enough. I stepped back. It was probably my imagination, but I left the light on when I left the room. That night, I double-checked all the windows. Closed. Locked. No gaps. Still, when I slid into bed, I felt it again. Grainy. Near my calf. I pulled back the sheet and found a patch of sand, maybe the size of a coin, pressed into the fitted corner. No trail. No sign of how it got there. I didn't change the sheets this time. Just swept it off with the side of my hand and lay back. The house was silent. Too much so. I strained my ears or anything. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a fan, something mechanical to remind me the world was still ticking. Nothing. That kind of silence you only find far from other people, but not peaceful. This wasn't that. It was a silence you get before someone speaks. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. No dreams. Just dark. When I woke up, I didn't check the time. I just stared at the ceiling. There was a sound, faint, in the hallway. A soft brushing, like someone dragging their fingers along the wall. I sat up slowly. The noise stopped. I stayed like that for a long time, just sitting, listening. Finally, I swung my feet out of bed and opened the door. The hall was empty, but the edge of the rug, facing the door, were 2 small handprints in the dust. Child-size, press flat, perfectly formed. Like someone had leaned down and waited. The handprints were gone by morning. Not faded, gone. As if they had never been there. The rug in the hallway was slightly misaligned, shifted about an inch to the left. I hadn't moved it, but maybe I kicked it without realizing. Maybe I was sleepwalking. I told myself that more than once that day. After breakfast, I sat on the back porch and sketched the dunes. I told myself to focus on form, on light, anything grounded. But I kept glancing at the sand around the base of the house, the way it seemed to dip, not erode, almost like something had exhaled beneath it. At noon, I took a walk down the beach. The tide was low. Not much debris. Just a few shells, 1 plastic fork, and an old rubber sandal that looked nearly fossilized. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand, and found a name scrawled on the sole in faint, flaking ink. Camille. My name. Same spelling. Same tilt to the I. It wasn't my handwriting, though. I dropped it and didn't look back. Back inside, the air was heavier. Not warmer, denser. I checked the thermostat. Still set to 72. But breathing felt like a conscious act. The mirror in the bathroom had tilted further downward, enough that I had to crouch slightly to see my face. Again, I tried to move it. It wouldn't budge. The screws were flush with the wall. No sign of warping. It was as if the wall itself had shifted. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't want to hear how my voice would sound in there. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, lights off, eyes open, the silence pressing from all sides. A living, full silence, like the house had absorbed every last echo. At some point after midnight, I heard it again, a brushing sound. Soft, slow, not footsteps, not scratching. Like something heavy dragging gently along the hallway floor. I sat up, held my breath. It stopped. After a long moment, I got out of bed and opened the door. Nothing in the hall. No prints. No marks. Except the mirror on the wall, the hallway one, opposite my door, had shifted too. Now it pointed down, reflecting only the floorboards and the tops of my feet. I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the kitchen with the light on and made tea I didn't drink. The kettle whistled too loudly. At dawn, I heard something fall upstairs. I waited a minute. Then, too, went up slowly. One of the kitchen chairs was in the guest bedroom, perfectly upright, centered on the rug. It wasn't there the night before. I didn't carry it up. I don't even remember opening that door. But it was there, as if someone had brought it in to watch something. Or wait. I carried it back down and locked the bedroom door behind me. Not that it made me feel better. That afternoon, I noticed sand in the closet, not on the floor, inside a shoe box, tucked beneath an old blanket. I hadn't opened that box. I hadn't even unpacked my extra shoes. The sand was fine, packed tight, no obvious source. Just a shallow layer, like a tiny sandbox. I dumped it out on the deck and put the box back. I stopped checking the mirror after that. Instead, I covered it with a towel and taped the corners. Not neatly, just enough. I didn't want to see what direction it would face tomorrow. Around 3 p.m., I found a small leather journal inside the cabinet above the microwave. It was wedged behind a box of expired tea. No name, no markings. Inside, only one phrase, repeated across 6 pages. It sinks. Then it waits. Over and over. No punctuation. Just those 5 words. All in the same careful handwriting. I closed the book and left it on the counter. That night, I locked my bedroom door, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. I pushed the dresser in front of it. Not because I expected anything to come in. I was more afraid of what might want to go out. Sleep didn't come. I drifted maybe for an hour or 2, the kind of rest that doesn't go deep enough to feel real. At 4:12 a.m., I woke on the floor beside the bed. My pillow was beside me. My feet were caked with sand. Not loose. Damp. Cold. Packed between my toes. The windows were still shut. The door still blocked. But there I was. And there was the sand. I walked to the kitchen, tracking it behind me, and rinsed off in the sink. My hands were trembling. The soap slipped from my grip twice. When I turned around, the journal was gone. Not moved. Gone. And in its place was a small mound of sand on the counter, the same spot where the book had been. I didn't scream. There wasn't anything to scream at. No sound in the house. No movement. Just a slow understanding that something had made space for itself. That I'd been sharing the house longer than I knew. That it didn't need to open doors or knock on walls. It was already here. Already beneath. I didn't try to sleep again. I sat on the porch until the sun rose. The ocean still didn't make a sound. Not even the breeze dared move. The sand around the deck steps had shifted again. I could see it now. A clear depression where my foot hadn't been. Shallow but wide. As if something massive had settled just below the surface and exhaled. I packed my bag that morning. No reason to stay. The fog had rolled back in sometime during the night. Thick as smoke. I could barely see past the first dune. The car sat in the gravel driveway, a strange little island in a sea of dust-colored haze. I shoved my bag in the back seat, slammed the trunk, and tried to leave. The engine turned, then died. Again, and again. On the 5th attempt, it caught, but the tires spun. I got out and checked. The wheels were half submerged in the gravel. The sand had thickened around them. Damp, heavy, like it had risen during the night. I didn't remember rain. I checked my phone, no service. Again, no data. The time blinked 12 o'clock. No a.m., no p.m., just stuck. Back inside the house, the lights flickered on their own, not in bursts, in rhythm, a slow, pulsing pattern. Kitchen, then hallway. Bedroom, then dark. The towel I'd taped over the bathroom mirror was on the floor. The mirror faced the ceiling now. It hadn't done that before. I stood at the top of the stairs and stared down. It was quiet again, that full silence, the kind that tells you you're not alone. I opened the basement door. I hadn't done that yet, hadn't needed to. Naomi had mentioned it, but I was out of options, and something, maybe instinct, maybe resignation, told me I needed to see. The light switch didn't work. I used my phone. Wooden stairs led down into packed earth and concrete. The air was damp, sour, close. The space was mostly empty. One table, covered with a dusty cloth, a rusted toolbox, a chair tipped over in the far corner, and in the middle of the floor, A square outline of disturbed soil. Not dug up, not fresh, just not like the rest. As if something had shifted beneath it. I didn't touch it, didn't go near it. But when I turned to leave, the light from my phone caught something on the wall. Scratched words, faint but deliberate. Same phrase as a journal. It sinks, then it waits. Only this time, below it, another line had been added. Then it remembers. I didn't scream. I walked back upstairs in silence. Back in the kitchen. The floor was wet. A trail of sand led from the fridge to the front door. No footprints. Just a movement of something heavy dragged along. I didn't follow it. Instead, I stood in front of the mirror again. The one now facing upward. I tilted it slowly. It reflected me, but not entirely. My face was there, but behind it, faintly, like an image caught in a second pane of glass, a shape. Small, crouched, watching. When I blinked, it vanished. I dropped the mirror. It didn't shatter, just landed face down, unmoving. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't try. I sat by the door, suitcase beside me, waiting for morning. At one point, maybe around 3, the light in the hallway came on by itself. Not flickering. Steady. I stood up, walked toward it. The sand had begun to rise to the floorboards, not pouring in, but seeping, like mist. Fine grains pushing up through cracks, silent and steady. It wasn't coming from somewhere. It was already here. The floorboard near the guest room creaked, slowly, rhythmically, as if someone was walking in place. Softly, behind the door, I backed into the kitchen. On the table sat my old journal, the one I hadn't seen in weeks. I hadn't brought it here. Its pages were open. My name was written across the margin in thick, childlike strokes. I turned the page. Nothing written. Just sand pressed flat between the sheets. I dropped it, left it there. At dawn, I opened the front door. The world outside was gone. Not dark, not destroyed, just erased. The dunes were smooth. The beach was flat. No footprints. No trees. No shells. Just sand, stretched out in every direction. And the sound, faint, almost below hearing, like breathing under the earth. I stepped back. The house creaked behind me. One long breath. In, then silence. The walls began to bow slightly inward. Only a little. Just enough to notice. I packed nothing. I took nothing. I opened a window and climbed out barefoot. The sand accepted me. Not deep, not warm, just ready. I walked 10 steps, 20. No resistance, no wind, no sound. When I looked back, the house was half gone. The bottom buried. The porch collapsed. No sign of struggle. No sign of collapse. It was sinking, slow, calm, as if it had never wanted to stand that long. I kept walking. I don't know how far I made it. At some point, I lay down. The sky above was blank, and the sand beneath me shifted, softly, like something turning over in its sleep. I can still feel it pressing against the soles of my feet, even now, even far from the shore. Story 3. The locked room at low tide. I arrived just before dusk. The guest house sat alone on a bluff, surrounded by wild grass and the slow sound of the ocean pulling itself apart below. The driveway was soft dirt, half washed away from the last rain. No welcome sign, no number on the mailbox. Just a single note taped to the door. Keys under the frog. Enjoy the quiet. The ceramic frog sat beside the porch steps, damp and chipped. The key was cold in my hand. I wasn't sure what I expected. A wave of grief, maybe a sharp feeling when I crossed the threshold. But there was nothing, just the creak of the old door and the scent of dust, salt, and lavender that had long dried into the wallpaper. The house was larger than it looked. 3 bedrooms, though only one had a bed made. A small kitchen with mismatched plates. A fireplace stacked with dry wood that seemed untouched. Everything clean enough, but not recently. Like someone had tidied up and left without saying goodbye. I placed my bag down and sat in the nearest chair. The silence was immediate. Not peaceful, just thick. The kind of silence you notice too late. I stayed on the first floor that evening, made tea, opened a book I didn't read, looked out the window at the cliff's edge where the wild stairs carved into stone disappeared into the surf. A sign nailed to the porch rail read, "Low tide access only." The words were nearly worn away. Around 10, I went upstairs. There were 3 rooms and a small hall closet. My bedroom was at the far end. The second room was empty, just a bare frame where a mattress should have been, and a stack of mildewed National Geographics. The third room was locked. No key, no explanation. The doorknob was brass, old and green tinged, with a small vent beneath it. When I leaned close, I heard nothing. No draft, no ticking pipes, just stillness. I touched the knob. It was wet, not damp, wet, like it had been held in a fist. I wiped my hand on my pants and walked away. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, just a kind of restlessness that settles in unfamiliar beds. I lay awake, watching shadows stretch along the ceiling, listening to the house breathe in its own way, distant cracks, old boards adjusting, the occasional sigh of wind through the chimney. At 2:47 a.m., I heard a sound, low, repetitive, a soft drag, like fabric pulled across wood. It came from upstairs. I sat up, listened. It stopped after 4 or 5 seconds. I stayed in bed. By morning, I convinced myself it was a wind. The house was old. Everything moved. I went outside to clear my head. The tide was out, and the staircase of the cove had emerged from the rock. Uneven steps cut into the stone, slick with moss, curving out of sight. I didn't go down, just stood there, staring at where the sea had withdrawn, like it was giving something space. Back inside, the puddle waited. It sat in the middle of the upstairs hallway, clear, maybe 6 inches across, rimmed with grit. No pipe overhead, no leak. The locked room door was dry. I fetched a towel and wiped it up. The wood beneath was cold. That afternoon, I spoke to the owner by phone, a second cousin of my late wife's, someone I barely knew. He'd offered me the place for a month, said it would be good to reset. I asked him about the locked room. "You won't need that one," he said. "It's sealed." Sealed. Hasn't been used in years. No key. Best to leave it alone when the tide's out. I didn't respond. He cleared his throat. "It's just storage." I didn't press further. That night, I sat by the fireplace and drank too much. The wind picked up around midnight. The power dipped once, then held. I went to bed sometime after 1. At 3:06 a.m., I woke with my hand on the doorknob, not the bedroom one, the locked room. I was standing barefoot in the hall. No memory of how I got there. The door was cracked open. An inch. I didn't move, didn't push it, just stood there, heart dull in my chest, and waited. From the vent near the floor, a sound rose. Not a voice, not breath, dripping, slow, heavy, water falling in the dark. I stepped back. The door clicked shut, softly, without touch. I walked back to bed and pulled a blanket over my head, like I hadn't done since childhood. When I woke, the door was locked again. The knob dry, but at the base of the door, just near the vent, a ring of salt had formed, thin and perfect. I don't know what it meant. I didn't sweep it away. I didn't go near the locked room the next day. The salt ring was still there when I woke, thin, unmoved. I stepped over it like it was something alive. Downstairs, the kettle wouldn't boil. The stove worked, but the water never reached a full roll, just small bubbles twitching beneath the surface, like it couldn't make up its mind. I drank it anyway. Didn't feel warm. Outside, the fog had come in so thick I couldn't see the road, only the edge of the bluff, and the long stairway that led down to the cove, still uncovered. The tide was out longer than usual. The steps looked darker than before, like they were wet even in dry air. I didn't go down. Instead, I wrote in my notebook, walked the length of the living room 5 times, then stopped. The floor felt different. Not soft exactly, but not stable. Like I was walking on a skin stretched over something hollow. There was a faint give, then resistance. No sound, just a sensation. A pressure that hadn't been there yesterday. I pulled back the rug and knocked on the floorboards. The sound came back dull. Waterlogged. I checked the basement. Dry. Empty. Smelled like old books and sea air, but no signs of rot. I climbed back up and avoided that part of the floor for the rest of the day. That evening, the wind changed. It had been blowing inland all week, but tonight it reversed, sharp and sudden, from the sea. The house creaked in a new way, as if it remembered something. I lit the fireplace. The flame took too long to catch. The logs were dry, but it resisted. When it finally flared, it burned blue for a full minute before settling. I stayed up late, reading, not really absorbing anything, just passing time. Around 2, the power flickered again. The light buzzed, dimmed, and came back brighter than before. I waited for the house to settle. Then I heard it, a soft thump above my head. Then another. It came every few seconds, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing barefoot on soaked boards. I didn't move. After the 5th thump, it stopped. A few minutes later, the heat came on. The vent near the floor exhaled with a hiss, but the air that came through was cold. Not cool, cold. I turned off the furnace. The sound didn't stop. I walked upstairs and stood in the hallway. The locked door looked the same. The salt ring undisturbed. But now I noticed something else. The vent beneath the door, it breathed. Not constantly. Just once every 20 seconds or so, a faint inhale. Then stillness. Then another. I crouched to listen. Nothing. Just a rhythm. I reached out and held my palm an inch from the vent. The air was damp. Behind me, one of the hallway lights went out. I didn't turn around. Just stood slowly and walked back to bed. I locked the door behind me, out of habit, not faith. Slept in short intervals. Kept waking from dreams I couldn't remember. At dawn, I sat up to find the window fogged over. It hadn't been cold. I wiped the circle clear with my hand. The outside was still misted, but visible. Someone had walked down to the cove. A set of wet footprints led from the base of the stairs, across the dirt road, and stopped directly beneath my window. No return trail. Just stopped. I dressed, made coffee I didn't finish, and sat with my notebook open. When I finally turned the page, the writing had changed. I didn't write the entry, but it was in my handwriting. Just a single line. She knocks only once. But if you answer, no end, no explanation. I closed the book and didn't open it again. Later that morning, I received a visit. A woman, mid-60s, wind-chapped cheeks, eyes too steady. She introduced herself as Mrs. Kinney. Lived on the next bluff over. Said she used to clean the house years ago, when it was still a rental. I invited her in, mostly because I didn't want to be alone. We sat in the kitchen. She didn't drink the tea I offered. After a minute of silence, she looked toward the ceiling and said, "You've heard it, haven't you?" I didn't answer. She nodded anyway. "You should leave before the neap tide. That's when she walks furthest." "Who?" I asked. Mrs. Kinney looked at me for a long time, then smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "It doesn't matter. Just don't open the door. It always wants you open the door." She stood up, thanked me, and left before I could stop her. That night, the wind howled. I sat on the stairs with the flashlight off, listening. The door never knocked. It didn't have to. It was already open. Just an inch. I closed it, slowly, pressed against it until I felt the latch click. Then I leaned my forehead against the wood and breathed. From the other side, a sound answered. Not speech, not voice. Something wet shifting closer. The door didn't stay shut. I pushed it closed the night before, heard the latch catch, even stacked a chair in front of it. But by morning, the chair was sideways on the floor and the door was ajar. Same exact opening, 1 inch. No more, no less. The salt ring had smeared into a crescent, like something had dragged through it. Not quickly, but with purpose. I stood there for a long time, watching the slow curl of mist drift in from the hallway window. It didn't feel like fog anymore. It felt like breath. I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked down to Bluff. The tide was lower than I'd seen it all month, so low that the sea itself looked reluctant to return. The staircase to the cove was fully exposed, sun-bleached, slick with barnacles, descending into shadow. I don't remember deciding to walk down. I just remember to feel the stone steps under my shoes, the faint crunch of salt in every crevice, and the strange impression that I was descending into something beneath time, not beside it. The cove was quiet. No gulls. No wind. The ocean lapped gently, too rhythmically, like a sleeping lung. There were no footprints in the sand, not even mine. The ground held no memory of movement. In the far corner of the cove stood a structure I hadn't seen from above, a short stone wall, crumbling, half consumed by dune grass and time. Set into it was a door, which swollen with moisture, rusted iron hinges like scars. I didn't approach. I left the cove way I came, walking slower than before, and when I reached the top, the wind returned all at once. Fast. Cold. The house was waiting. Inside, the air was heavier. Walls seemed to lean in. Shadows from nowhere stretched farther than the angle of the light allowed. I didn't turn on the lamps. I didn't want to see things fully. Upstairs, the door was wide open. No hinges creaked. No sudden gust. Just open. The room beyond wasn't what I expected. It wasn't much of anything. No furniture. No window. Just damp wallpaper peeling in vertical strips, and a warped mirror hung low on one wall. Much too low, as if meant for someone who never stood up straight. The mirror was cracked. Not broken, but weeping. Drops of seawater slid down its surface from a split near the top. Below it, a small rust-colored stain bloomed into the floorboards. I stepped closer. In the glass, my reflection stood alone, but behind it, just over my left shoulder, something moved. I turned quickly. Nothing, but the floor beneath my feet was damp, and the air carried a deep, briny cold that didn't match the season. On the ground near the mirror, partially covered in curled wallpaper, was a silver ring. My wife's. Same engraving on the inner band. Same faint scratch along the edge. The one she'd made the night she dropped it on our tile floor. I never brought it here. I stared at it without touching. Behind me, the mirror darkened. I turned. My reflection was still there, alone, but the room in the reflection was different, darker, deeper, and in the far back corner, a figure, barely outlined, dripping, head bowed. I blinked. It was gone. I stepped backward and left the room without taking the ring. I should have left the house. I packed a bag, made it as far as the driveway, but the car keys were gone. My phone, too. The house was already closing in. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I sat in the hallway outside the locked room, no longer locked, and listened to the vent. It was no longer breathing. It was murmuring, too faint to make out. A voice I almost recognized. Not quite hers. Not quite anyone's. I didn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., I stood in the doorway again. The ring was gone. The stain had widened. And in the mirror, no reflection. Only the hallway, behind me, empty. Then, slowly, as if surfacing from deep water, a hand appeared in the glass. Small, wet. It pressed the inside of the mirror, then slid down, leaving a long smear. I backed away. Behind me, the floor groaned. I turned. But there was only the hallway. Still, silent. I didn't go back into the room. I went outside. The tide was lower than ever. The cove exposed entirely. I walked down barefoot. The stones cool against my skin. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through sleep. The door in the cove was open now, dark inside. Water pooled at its base. I stood in the frame and waited. The smell of salt and memory thickened. I thought I heard her voice again, not a word. Just tone. That soft call she used when she couldn't find me in a store. When I turned to go, I found I couldn't. Not physically. Just, I didn't know where else to go. So I sat and waited. I still don't know what lives in that house, or what stirs in the tides that carve the cliff beneath it. But I know this. It never asked for violence, only presence. It wants to be remembered. And I think I've been chosen to do just that. I haven't left the house. The tide hasn't come back in.